Hey everybody, it's Nick. How's it going? This is not a campaign diary. This is not a story of my game where I tell you the lessons that I have learned and what's going on there, as you can probably tell by the title happening. And if you are linked to this video from somewhere else like Reddit or Facebook or Google or YouTube's algorithms or whatever, hey, how's it going? Usually my channel is talking about the story of my game and what happened and lessons I learned and ways that it can help you or things you can steal. But today I want to do something a little bit different. I had an idea for a video that I wanted to talk about, and I thought I had some interesting ideas about, and I've sort of collected information from various communities and wanted to share them with you and tell you what I thought about specifically home brewing and house ruling as a newer or maybe even intermediate skilled and experienced DM, and how you can do it, how you shouldn't do it, ways that it's good and ways that it's not. I homebrew quite a bit in my games. I balance and adjust and tweak and house rule, and I'm often a little bit surprised to find out another DM doesn't, because I think that 5th edition is such a good set of rules, but it's sort of a framework. It's just a generic set, and that's important because it means that they can work relatively well at every table. But if you want them to really, really work hard at your table, you have to do, I think, a little bit of tinkering and tweaking, and that's okay. The game designers, Mike Merles and Jeremy Crawford, have done a wonderful job putting together the rule set for 5th edition, but I think you know your campaign and your table better than they do. You will know that in some circumstances or situations a rule doesn't work how you think it should, or how it makes sense, or how it flows, and sometimes you have to tweak and adjust and rebalance based on the circumstance, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about that in this video. So, of course, you don't have to homebrew, you don't have to house rule. There are many, many people who run awesome games that they have a lot of fun playing in that just run it strictly according to the rules, or raw, rules as written. And they have so much fun doing it. I don't want to bash or disregard anyone who plays raw or just by the rules. That's fine, that's awesome, go you. But if you have run into situations where you think maybe something should work a little bit different than it does, or you don't know how to adjust or rebalance and are worried about that, let's talk about that in this video about home brewing and house ruling. With all that out of the way, let's get into it. So as a sort of forewarning, this is not going to have a ton of these are the things that you should house rule and homebrew. It's all going to be down to taste. It's all going to be down to what you think is important to change and tweak and how you want it to work or not work. But these are going to be like principles and concepts that you can use to guide your homebrewing and house ruling so that you don't completely mess up an important system of game design and totally ruin your campaign. So the first major thing is reflavor before you homebrew. If you have something that can be a change that needs to be implemented that can be tweaked just by reflavoring it, just by describing it as something else, do that first. So if a player sees a half dragon in like the monster manual, or they find art about it and it just looks really cool and they want to play that, not like a regular dragonborn, they want to play this more dragon-like dragon thing, let them do that and just say, in game you look like this, but for mechanics just use a dragonborn stat block. Okay? If a player is playing a fighter samurai and they want to have a katana with that class, that's super cool, go for it. But instead of finding or making up some katana stat block, just use a longsword and tell them, describe it as a katana. And you will have one of two reactions to this from a player who is asking for something different, you reflavor it. One reaction is, cool, that's exactly what I wanted, and now I'm satisfied and happy. The other reaction is, man, I wanted to use this cool stat block that I found on D&D Wiki, which is a terrible site, don't use it. It's like really OP and really cool, and I wanted to use this one. In either case, be really glad that you reflavored. Because in those cases, all you had to do was just describe it as something else, and you didn't hurt the game at all by trying to reintroduce or newly introduce this busted and weird thing that wasn't going to help your game in the long run. This is also really useful as a DM from your side of the screen. Let's say you want a flying skull that's going to run around and just bite people, but you don't really know how to do that. There's not a stat block for that in the Monsters Manual or in Volo's or Mordenkainen's. How do you find what to do? Well, take something else and just reflavor it. Take a giant wasp, for example, and just describe it as a flying, floating skull that bites people. That's all you have to do. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. You don't have to redesign from the ground up and make sure it's balanced with CR and all those things, a flying, floating skull. Just use another thing and describe it as something else. So it's a very useful tool as a DM. The flavor text and description gives you an enormous amount of control. Try to reuse other existing stat blocks and describe it as something else. It's very useful, very helpful. Okay, but you're now in a situation where you have to do some rebalancing. You really feel like you need to do some homebrew, some house ruling, some tweaks because of the situation and circumstance. So how do you do it effectively, responsibly, so you don't mess up your game by adding in rules that really hurt the balance? Well, I think it's important to know why a rule exists before you change it. A lot of times I see on various Reddits and Discords and discussions people saying, hey, I've never played 5th edition before, but I read the rules, I've read the books, I've seen Critical Role or something like that, and I think blank is really broken for one reason or another, and here's my tweak and here's my fix. Overwhelmingly, those are terrible posts with terrible ideas. And it's not the author's fault. They're not dumb people. They just didn't understand how the rules worked before they started trying to adjust and tweak. And it's like trying to run before you know how to walk. I strongly recommend just figure out why the rules are there in the first place before you start to tweak and mess with things. So for example, a fundamental principle of design in 5th edition. 5th edition D&D has very few floating modifiers. And almost all of those are like plus 10, which basically means you succeed at. If you don't believe me, go and look it up. Go and see how many places there are that give conditional bonuses of like +1, +2, +3 to certain situations, skills, abilities, attack rolls, things like that. There are almost none in 5th edition. This is an intentional design decision. Why did they do this? Well, there's 2 reasons, actually. One reason was because they have advantage and disadvantage, which is a beautiful system. It's so good. Advantage and disadvantage, it's so clean, it's simple, it's easy to use and remember. It's also really fun to roll more dice, so rolling more dice is better. There is also another aspect of it, something called bounded accuracy or flattened math, where numbers don't fluctuate and increase and decrease all that much over the course of a campaign. It's sort of flattened a little bit, and that was an intentional design decision. For example, in a 3.5 game that I'm a player in, last session I got my AC up to 50. It was based on conditions and circumstances and bonuses, and if you don't believe me, I can describe the whole situation in the comments or whatever, that's fine. But that's beside the point. That can't happen in 5th edition because there aren't those circumstances and cases, there aren't floating modifiers. So it's important to know that that exists and why it exists before you change it. Now, just because you're aware that that exists doesn't mean you can't change it. I have a flanking rule of mine that I give a +2 to attack rolls for melee characters if they are flanking an opponent. And I recognize that this is not normal to 5th edition game design, but I saw in the Dungeon Master's Guide there's a variant rule for flanking where it gives you advantage. And I thought that was a bit too much, and it sort of lessened from other people who have sources of getting advantage in cool ways, and I didn't want to detract from that because it doesn't really stack. And so I said, I don't want to use advantage, but I also don't want there to be nothing for being tactical bonuses and being in combat and flanking, and I wanted to encourage that to some degree. So I gave a +2. I was aware of the principle of the game design, and I actively chose to violate it in this small, focused way. I know it makes the game less simple, and I'm okay with that. I know it can mess with the bounded accuracy, and I'm okay with that. So it's fine to violate these principles if you're aware of why they exist in the first place. So it's important to know the rules, but it's also really important to have an objective. When you are designing, when you are changing, when you are tweaking, You are a game designer. Congratulations. It's important to have an objective as you design. It's important to know where you're going and what the direction is. So for example, again, I changed the feats Great Weapon Master and Sharpshooter to, instead of being -5 to hit and +5 damage, I made it minus your proficiency modifier to hit and plus double your proficiency modifier to hit. Why did I do that? Well, I wanted the feats to be less overwhelmingly powerful at low levels and scale slightly better into higher levels. So it starts off at -2 plus 4 and ends up at -6 plus 12. And that was a very intentional decision. I didn't want those feats to be required at early levels because they're so strong. But I also wanted them to scale just a little bit better in the late game. So that was an intentional design decision that I had beforehand and I implemented with this tweak. Next, get some peer review. Get other people to look at your stuff. It's so important to have communities and friends that you can reach out to and say, hey, is this a terrible idea? Because sometimes they'll tell you, yes, that's a terrible idea, don't do that. Over the years, there's been a lot of tweaks and rules and changes that I have tried or wanted to implement, but as I shared them with various Reddits and Discords and friends of mine, they were like, yeah, this is a bad idea because X, Y, and Z. And I looked back at it and I was like, yeah, those are terrible ideas, why would I do that? But it's important to have somebody else looking at your design. Don't design in a vacuum. It's not going to be good for your game usually. And so sometimes people will come up with critique or problems that you can see that they have different objectives or different principles that they understand the game around. And you can say, okay, I get what you're saying, but I disagree, and so I'm going to go in another direction. But it's important to get that feedback so that you can make an informed decision before you just change something because you thought it was a good idea without getting any other feedback from more experienced people. So share your ideas on various subreddits. There's a lot of great ones. Unearthed Arcana is really good for various sources of homebrew stuff. Just general like tweaks and house rules. You can use DM Academy or r/D&D. There's a lot of great places for it. Heck, if you don't have anyone to send it to me. Comment down below or send me a message or something, and I'll take a look at it and tell you what I think about it. So there you have it, folks. Those are some of my thoughts on homebrewing and house ruling and how to do it responsibly and effectively. What did we talk about? Just sort of a refresher and a recap. We talked about reflavoring before you house rule or homebrew, because a lot can be done with just descriptive and flavor text and reflavoring something in that way. We talked about making sure that you know what a rule is and why it exists in that way before you change it. If you're a very, very new DM, I suggest playing several sessions of 5th edition just as is. Don't change anything yet. Just play it as it's written and see how stuff feels normally. Then, if you have specific issues, you make sure that you have a design goal in mind and try to tweak and change things a little bit and try to see if you can implement stuff along that direction. And lastly, get it peer reviewed. Get somebody else to see it and say, hey, this is what I think about it, this is my perspective on it. Share it to places and get some discussion on it and just get some other feedback, some outside sources so you can some other eyes on it other than yours can help a ton. So those are some of my thoughts on how to homebrew and house rule. There were a lot of principles and concepts. There were some specifics as examples, but if you want more specifics on what are good homebrew house rules, I can't promise they're good, but I will link mine in the description below. And you can tell me what you think. Tell me if you think that they're good, if you think that they work. That's up to you. If you want to use them, feel free, but don't just copy them because I use them. I have very specific design goals in mind when I implemented all of those house rules. And so maybe you don't have the same design goals. Maybe you don't see the same problems in 5th edition. That's fine. So don't just copy something because somebody else does it. Know why you want to change it when you change it that way. So if you guys liked this or disliked it or had thoughts of your own, I would love to hear what you thought in the comments below. I want to see if I can engage with you guys more as a community and see if we can keep building this up and discuss more about D&D. I love it so much. You guys are all my friends because anyone who I talk to about D&D a lot is my friend. So you guys are all my friends now. Thanks. You didn't have a choice. And I just want to hear what you think. I want to hear if you guys didn't like what I had to say about various design principles. That's fine with me. Let's have a discussion about it. So I hope we can keep things a little bit civil and understanding in the comments. We can have a good, healthy discussion where we can grow a little bit. But I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys think. And I will keep making campaign diary videos, but I think occasionally I'm going to throw in videos like this if I have an idea or something that I want to talk about. If you guys have something you want to hear my opinion on, throw it in the comments and I will save it for later for a video. We've got another video coming up in a couple weeks because we're not going to meet for D&D next weekend, so I'll have another video and we'll do something else. We'll talk about something else. So you will get a video next week, but we'll see what it's about later on. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.